Number 15. The man who woke up speaking fluent Mandarin. A week after a near-fatal car crash, 22-year-old Ben McMahon from Melbourne awoke from a coma speaking fluent Mandarin. Standing near him was an Asian nurse, and he said in Chinese, "Excuse me, nurse, I feel really sore here." He asked the same nurse for a sheet of paper, upon which he wrote, "I love my mom, I love my dad, I will recover," in, you guessed it, Mandarin. Ben's parents had been told that their son's survival of this crash would be a miracle. Little did they expect two miracles to occur from the traumatic incident: his survival and his sudden language skills. According to Mark, Ben's father, when hospital staff called him, they told him, "Ben's actually started to come out of the coma, and I don't know how to say this. He's speaking Mandarin." Neither of Ben's parents spoke Mandarin. Though Ben had learned some of the Chinese language at school, he was far from fluent. But somehow, he now spoke it fluently. "I wasn't consciously thinking I was speaking Mandarin," Ben said. "It was what just came out, and it was most natural to me." His natural language, English, did not come naturally to him at first. He only ventured to speak it a few days later. His newfound fluency in Mandarin has since provided him a slew of opportunities. He's become a tour guide to Chinese tourists, hosted a Mandarin TV program, and relocated to Shanghai in order to study commerce. No one can explain why or how Ben woke up speaking fluent Mandarin. But he isn't the first case, nor it seems the last of his kind. A 13-year-old Croatian girl awoke in 2010 speaking German, and in 2013, a US Navy vet woke from unconsciousness, not knowing who he was and speaking fluent Swedish. While no one can know for certain what caused the sudden onset language fluency, Dr. Pankaj Saw has ventured a guess. He suggested that the circuits of Ben's brain, in particular those that assist in language, were triggered in the crash. The Mandarin retaining circuits were activated, while those that retained English were deactivated as he awoke from his coma. It's a proven fact that generosity makes you a happier person, so if you're generous enough to like this video, then thank you, because it really helps us out. Number 14. The Boy Without Hunger. 12-year-old Landon Jones from Cedar Falls, Iowa, developed a strange and rare condition when he awoke in October of 2014 with chest congestion and dizziness. He no longer felt thirsty or hungry. The cause of the congestion was a bacterial infection in his left lung. This was cured, but his desire to eat and drink never returned. The strange thing is his ability to smell and taste has not changed, so his lack of hunger or thirst has nothing to do with the alteration in his senses. His parents now had to force him to eat and drink, and still, his weight has plummeted from 104 pounds to 68.4. Doctors may be required to install a feeding tube if Landon doesn't maintain his weight. However, they're resistant to this idea, as feeding tubes are prone to complications and infection. Another option to boost his caloric intake, called megestrol acetate, which is used with AIDS and cancer patients. Doctors have run medical tests in 5 different cities in order to try and diagnose this strange condition, including brain scans, spinal tap, nutritional and psychiatric evaluations, and abdominal imaging, all without result. Dr. Ashish Mehta, a director of epilepsy surgery not involved in the case, suggested that an issue along the circuit that controls hunger and thirst at various levels of the brain may be at fault. If something malfunctioned along this circuit, it could also explain Landon's symptoms. One of Landon's doctors, a pediatric neurologist named Dr. Mark Patterson, has suggested that the boy's hypothalamus may be what's causing the lack of hunger and thirst. This pea-sized region of the brain helps control not only thirst and hunger, but sleep, body temperature, and various other vital functions. This issue could have been caused by traveling bacteria, which may have crossed the blood-brain barrier from Landon's lung infection. An infection in the hypothalamus or even a lesion would therefore explain his condition. Still another theory, the boy may have developed an overproduction of leptin, a hormone that satiates hunger, or an intolerance to ghrelin, a hormone that stimulates hunger. However, neither of these would explain Landon's lack of thirst. In the end, Landon's condition is so strange and rare that the mystery has yet to be unraveled. Number 13. The girl who never aged. Benjamin Button comes to mind in this case, although Brooke Greenberg didn't age backwards. She simply didn't age at all. Greenberg, from Reisterstown, Maryland, was an anomaly to doctors and scientists, as her mental capacity refused to develop beyond that of a 2-year-old, and her physical size beyond that of an infant. She stood 30 inches tall and weighed 16 pounds when her family was interviewed on 2020, and though she couldn't talk, she could recognize her sisters, none of whom had the condition. During the first 6 years of her life, Brooke suffered from a number of medical emergencies, such as perforated stomach ulcers, a brain seizure, a stroke, and a brain tumor. Rarely was there any explanation for these emergencies. After the brain tumor had been found, the Greenbergs were prepared for Brooke to die, as she hadn't opened her eyes in 6 days. Then, suddenly, she did open them. The tumor had disappeared, and she was fine. Brooke was diagnosed with the minimally understood Syndrome X, a disorder that prevents aging. She is among only a dozen children worldwide with this disorder. Richard F. Walker, a retired medical researcher, has studied her case and compared her genetic code to others with Syndrome X. He's found that no abnormal chromosomes or genetic syndromes can explain why the bodies of those with the disorder do not develop as a unit. Instead, the parts of the body are out of sync. For instance, although Brooke's bone age was said to be around 10 years old, she still had her baby teeth when she was 16. Her brain, as well, has changed little. In studying other similar cases, Walker has found that people who suffer from this condition have a growth rate of 1/5 of a human's normal growth rate. They also tend to suffer from numerous other medical conditions, such as inability to walk, deafness, and they are often unable to eat or speak. Without maturation, a person never develops. Walker explains, a person never develops, and the independent pieces of our bodies must be coordinated in order to do that. In people with Syndrome X, there is no coordination. Brooke died at the age of 20 without ever having aged a day past 2. Number 12. The man with the rotated heart. Imagine your organs twisting around like an amusement park ride in your body. Does it make you squeamish? Well, that's sort of what happened when a 48-year-old Italian man was thrown from his motorcycle, causing his heart to rotate and land on the right side of his chest. The man was rushed to the emergency room after the accident with severe chest trauma. A cardiac exam was performed to measure his heart rate and its rhythm. The medical staff suspected that the man had dextrocardia, which is when the heart is located on a body's right side instead of the left. However, a CT scan and some chest x-rays showed that the heart wasn't born there. In fact, it had rotated 90 degrees clockwise. No one had seen anything like it. The man suffered from pneumothorax as well, which caused a collapsed lung, along with several fractured ribs. A full body scan showed that the aorta, the pulmonary artery, both ventricles, and both atria had rotated right. The occurrence was called both unusual and interesting by cardiologists. Though Dr. Gregory Fontana was not involved in the man's recovery, he spoke about the man's case. What's unique about this case is the way the heart had rotated so far in the other direction, and the patient was still awake and alert. Fontana believes that the accident caused air to gather outside the lungs, pushing and shifting the heart. His theory seems likely, as the man's NEJM report notes that once he's undergone chest drainage, his heart reverted to its normal location a day later. This follow-up of this man's case showed that this rotation of the heart didn't appear to cause any sustained damage, despite constricting his blood vessels for a time. One thing's for sure after studying this case: the human body is incredible. Number 11. The girl with the sudden unexplainable paralysis. Many are familiar with polio because it's existed for thousands of years, and particularly because there was an epidemic during the 1950s, one that continued to cause paralysis into the late 70s. In fact, there were 254,000 paralysis cases in the US still in 1977. This epidemic was due to the polio virus, which caused an incredibly infectious disease that produces symptoms within a few hours to a few days. Although the polio virus has been, more or less, eradicated in the US due to the development of the polio vaccine in the 1950s, a mysterious new string of unexplained child paralysis cases has popped up recently. A study into the cause of this new illness shows that a fresh new polio-esque strain of virus may be the cause. At this point, around 100 children across 34 states have contracted sudden onset paralysis or muscle weakness in their legs and arms. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this condition is called acute flaccid myelitis. Enterovirus D68 was previously linked to around 20% of these cases. This virus causes respiratory infections, just like the common cold, but doesn't necessarily cause the symptoms of muscle weakness or paralysis. The study showed that one of the paralysis cases, that of a 6-year-old girl, may have been caused by the enterovirus C105, which is a virus of the same species as polio. This also doesn't necessarily prove that this virus caused paralysis. However, its association with polio may imply that the sudden outbreak of acute flaccid myelitis has been caused by something besides enterovirus D68. Prior to contracting the condition, the test case had been perfectly healthy. She'd caught a cold, which gave her a mild fever. Though her cold symptoms disappeared, pain in her arm did not. She had problems lifting and using her right hand, and her shoulder drooped. She was brought to the hospital, where she tested negative for enterovirus D68 and positive for enterovirus C105. Enterovirus C105 has various genetic sequences, making it difficult to detect. This may be why it was missed in the current outbreak. Additionally, the virus must be found in the spinal fluid of the patients in order to be directly linked to the muscle weakness and paralysis. So far, it's only been found in the respiratory system, which doesn't directly impact the nervous system. The study states the presence of this virus strain in North America may contribute to the incidence of flaccid paralysis and may also pose a diagnostic challenge in clinical laboratories. Number 10. The girl who cries stones. 12-year-old Sadaya Saleh from Yemen has somehow developed a serious medical condition that replaces her tears with stones. Doctors have no idea how this strange phenomenon developed. The small rock-hard stones develop beneath Sadaya's eyelids and roll naturally to the front of her eyes and onto her cheeks. Azal, a Yemeni news channel, posted a video of the curious case to YouTube. In the video, Sadaya's doctor collects the stones in a box over several hours. He wipes into a sheet of paper, and emerging one from where it's fallen on the girl's cheek. The girl's eyes are kept open by her doctor. They water, but the production of the stones don't seem to cause her any pain. Not only is this a rare condition or disease, It's almost entirely unprecedented and unexplainable. The only other report of this type of condition occurred in 1996 when 12-year-old Hasna Mohammed Masamani from Lebanon produced crystals from her eyes that were painful and sharp. The short-term condition only lasted 9 months, after which it was found to be a hoax contrived by her mother. But is Sadea's condition a hoax as well? To villagers, it doesn't seem so. This curious case has led many locals to believe that Sadea is possessed by the devil, has been victim of dark magic, or that this condition could be the beginnings of a fatal epidemic. Many in the village are panicked, and the condition has yet to be diagnosed. Number 9. The woman who seizes to Neo's voice. Can't stand the sound of a colleague's voice? How about a pop star's? That's understandable, but has their vocal tenor ever caused you to seize? Zoe Finessi, a 26-year-old mother and healthcare assistant from Redford, Nottinghamshire, claims that she suffered seizures from pop star Neo's voice. After being ill for a long time, her first seizure occurred on New Year's Day of 2006. Doctors believe it was due to stress and exhaustion. However, her seizures continued to occur, and so did their frequency. Soon, there were up to 6 per day. Zoe was diagnosed with epilepsy in 2008, but it wasn't until 2011 that she experienced her first musically induced seizure. Give Me Everything, Neo's hit featuring Pitbull, is what set her off. Seconds after hearing Neo's voice, an epileptic seizure stopped Zoe in her tracks. As Neo became more popular, the resulting seizures grew crippling, making her vomit violently, freeze, or become completely unreactive to everything around her. Zoe began wearing headphones whenever she went out, so that if Neo's voice came over a store soundtrack or on public transport, she would remain unaffected. I'll be walking around the supermarket doing my food shopping, and I have to put my headphones in to listen to my own music just in case it comes on, she said. It's the same with most shops. I have to walk in with my earphones in at first, just to make sure they don't have Neo on. Zoe was medically diagnosed with musicogenic seizures, which is a rare condition that's triggered by the tone of a singer's voice. Eventually, the condition impacted her life to the extent that she decided to remove a section of her left frontal lobe. The surgery, however, was unsuccessful. Her doctors think the condition may be chronic. The condition hasn't only impacted her social life, it's affected her work. She hasn't been back to work for 6 months, and although she enjoys Neo and his music, its impact has been monumental. People might think it is funny, and I can laugh at it myself, but it has taken over my life. It's ruined my life. While a musicogenic seizure is rare, it's not unprecedented. It occurs when the listener's brain cannot tolerate certain frequencies of pitch or a type of music. The brain's activity becomes abnormal due to these sounds and leads the person to seize. Number 8. The girls with the synchronized spasms. Katie Krautwurst of Leroy, New York, awoke from a nap one day to find her face twitching in spasms. Weeks later, the spasms continued to occur. What's more is that her friend, Thera Sanchez, found herself twitching too. She'd awoke from a nap, stuttering. Her head suddenly began to jerk, as did her arms. Weeks later, Lydia Parker began making the same noises and abrupt movements. Then Chelsea Dumars. Soon 18 girls in a school with 600 students, as well as one 36-year-old woman and one boy, had developed these strange tics. As the strange case gained media attention, experts were driven to the school to try and figure out what was going on. The case that started it all was Katie. She was taken to the hospital after she started twitching, and the doctors deemed her issue an anxiety attack. When the twitching continued, Katie underwent numerous tests, including a blood panel and an MRI. Doctors told her mother she had tics. Then her friend Dara developed the tics as well, but she was also told they were stress-related. However, as more and more girls came down with these strange symptoms, people began to think that there was more to this medical mystery than stress and anxiety. They began to think there was something in the school's soil or water. The New York State Department of Health was brought in to investigate, but they refused to reveal the results at a community meeting, quoting patients' rights to privacy. A neurologist who had examined a number of the girls diagnosed them with conversion disorder, a subconscious conversion of stress into physical symptoms. The fact that it had impacted so many implied that mass hysteria was also involved. Many of the children's parents didn't accept this diagnosis. They believed instead that the affliction was the environment, perhaps a result of waste left over from the old manufacturing plants in Leroy. Maybe even something to do with the toxic chemical spill from a 1970 train accident near Leroy, which dumped trichloroethylene, a solvent connected with damage to the nervous system when exposed in high doses. But the more likely diagnosis is conversion disorder. The odd condition ignites certain voluntary pathways in the brain. However, it's experienced as entirely involuntary. Studies into conversion disorder find that the amygdala, which is the central figure in the brain that corresponds with startle and fear responses, is highly active, and those with conversion disorder may be linked to the involuntary movements. The thing that is most curious about Leroy is that the cases are a combination of two different phenomena: mass psychogenic illness, commonly known as mass hysteria, and conversion disorder. Dr. Jennifer McVige, who examined 14 of these cases, said that many of the patients have faced trauma or stressors of some kind. This is common with conversion disorders, but uncommon for mass psychogenic illness. However, other factors of the series of cases strongly suggest mass psychogenic illness. The patients are mainly young women, which is very common for this type of illness, and the outbreak occurred at a school, which is the setting for more than half of the mass psychogenic illnesses. It's also common for cases of mass hysteria to be resolved quickly, but only when the cause is correctly identified. When people focus on other possibilities, like toxins or environmental faults, it's much harder to resolve. This is what happened at Leroy. However, the cases have since dwindled, and the tics and spasms have all but stopped in some of the girls. Number 7. The woman who lost her pulse. While undergoing a C-section, a woman in Florida stopped breathing. There seemed to be no complications during Ruby Grapera's C-section. That is, until doctors realized her bloodstream had been flooded by fluid from her amniotic sac, resulting in an amniotic fluid embolism, which stopped the patient's heart. Her heart acted as a vacuum to the fluid, which stalled the function of her lungs and circulation. Chest compressions to restart her breathing were done for hours. In fact, she lost her pulse for 45 minutes, but oddly enough, the chest compressions caused no bruising, and no burn marks were left by the paddles doctors applied to defibrillate her heart. Grapera didn't even suffer neurological damage from the lack of blood flow to her brain. She was taken off life support a day later and allowed to go home in perfect health, just days after being technically dead for 45 minutes. An amniotic fluid embolism is very rare, occurring anywhere between 1 in every 40,000 deliveries in North America. When they do occur, they are rarely understood. There are very few things in medicine that I've seen that really were either unexplainable or miraculous, said Dr. Anthony Dardano, the hospital medical staff president. And when I heard this story, that was the first thing that came to my mind. A miracle? Divine intervention? We may never know why this woman was taken momentarily and then saved. But we do know that it's one of the most curious medical mysteries in the world. Number 6. The woman with the audible body. What if you could hear every move you made? The joints in your fingers clicking every time you type, the pumping of your blood, and even the blinking and rotation of your eyes. Rachel Pine, a 28-year-old school photographer from Indiana, dealt with this rare affliction, which nearly drove her insane. Pine's hearing was extremely enhanced, amplifying all sounds within her body, from her muscles to her brain. I could hear my neck muscles moving, Pine said, like different things inside my body, and when you tell people that, they're like, "You're crazy." The amplified sounds were accompanied by dizzy spells, causing Pine to limit her work and her hobbies. The issue had become completely debilitating. I would end up in bed usually before noon and just lay there, Pine told ABC News. I couldn't watch TV. It was too loud. I couldn't listen to music. Instead, she'd just lie there, listening to her heartbeat and her brain spin. 9 doctors couldn't diagnose her, and she'd almost given up. That is, until she found medical surgeon Dr. Quentin Gopin from UCLA's Ronald Reagan Medical Center. He diagnosed Pine with SCD, superior semicircular canal dehiscence, which is a rare condition where an abnormal opening in the bone of the inner ear impacts hearing and balance. This explained the amplification of internal sounds, like Pine's own voice, her heartbeat, and each movement of her body. Gopin noted that only 1 person in 500,000 suffer from SCD. He also stated that the diagnosis is a fairly new one, having only been around for 15 odd years, and there seems to be no event or cause that creates the opening. Despite the mystery of it all, Pine was just happy she'd found an answer, and that she wasn't crazy. UCLA put her through a minimal invasive surgery to repair the SCD, in which they plugged a hole in the inner ear via small incisions in Pine's skull. She had surgery done on both ears, and the results were immediate. When I woke from surgery, I knew right off the bat that I was better, and I had no more dizziness, and I was talking to the nurse right when I woke up, and I was ready to get up and go somewhere, Pine said. According to Pine's neurosurgeon, Dr. Isaac Yang, this immediate response is usually of this type after surgery. After 90 minutes, patients awake, feeling completely cured. Number 5. The woman who hears music. Have you ever gotten a horribly catchy song stuck in your head? Over and over again, the jingle jangles in your brain, but eventually, it vanishes from the peripheral of your mind, and you're again free to think about what you're going to eat for lunch today. Well, imagine that it never vanishes. Imagine that the same catchy tune is stuck on a repeat in your brain. Susan Root doesn't have to imagine it. She has a specific form of tinnitus, which is a perception of ringing or noise in the ears, and is not a condition itself, but rather a symptom of an ear injury, age-related hearing loss, or a circulatory system disorder. For Susan Root, it manifests in the form of music that plays on a loop from morning to night. In fact, her condition has ruined one of her favorite childhood songs by Patti Page, "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?" This tune has ceaselessly shuffled through Root's head for the past 3 years. Intermittent interjectory tunes include Auld Lang Syne, Happy Birthday, and God Save the Queen, but these only pop in on rare occasion. Although it may seem convenient to have a radio programmed into your skull, not being able to turn it off has been a nightmare for Root. Particularly at night, it's a struggle for Root to get to sleep. "It drives me to breaking point at times," she said. "It comes and goes, but I can always hear music faintly in the background. Though the music goes on, she is able to drown it out with whale or bird songs. However, sometimes it's so loud she can't hear those around her speak. Tinnitus is more common than one might think. Nearly 10% of adults in the UK suffer from mild forms of tinnitus, according to the British Tinnitus Association. However, fewer suffer from musical hallucinations, and only 1% say it impacts the quality of their life, which makes the extreme case of Roots a rare and curious one. Doctors attempted to address Root's hearing problems with a hearing aid and provided her with special therapy, but it didn't turn the radio off. Number 4. The woman who regained their sight. Having been blind from the age of 11 from a tumor pressing on her optic nerve, New Zealander Lisa Reed had resigned herself to the fact that she'd never be able to see again. Then one day in November, she bumped her head slightly on a coffee table after bending down to kiss her dog goodnight. The following morning, she opened her eyes and she could see. "Nobody knows what happened or can explain it," Reed said. "I can't really find words to describe how it felt. Amazing, fantastic. You can imagine not being able to see, and then you can. You can't really describe that. To see the world again visually is a gift." Upon regaining her sight, she was most shocked by seeing that her brother had aged. "I turned into a woman, and my brother turned into a man," she said. No one has been able to explain how a slight bump helped Reed regain her sight. It's a medical mystery and a miracle. Number 3. The woman born without a cerebellum. Imagine that you have no balance, posture, speech, or motor learning skills. This is what may happen if your cerebellum disappeared. The cerebellum is the part of the brain that contains nearly half of all the brain's neurons. It is located at the base of the skull and makes up about 10% of the brain's volume. Disease or injury can cause partial function loss to the cerebellum, but being born with a damaged cerebellum is rare, and being born without one at all is even more rare. A 24-year-old woman in China is among the 9 known cases of cerebellar agnesis. The woman was unable to speak until she was 6 years old and unable to walk until she was 7. Simply jumping and playing games was impossible for her, and even when she learned to walk, she couldn't do it without support. Surprisingly, the medical defect wasn't discovered until she suffered vertigo and nausea as she got older and received an MRI and CT scans to aid a diagnosis. What doctors found left them in shock. Her cerebellum was missing altogether, which showed she had problems with pronunciation, though she understood vocabulary. Doctors, however, were surprised that the impairment wasn't severe, considering her cerebellum was entirely non-existent. To reduce her nausea and vertigo, the woman was given a dehydration treatment to get rid of some of the cerebrospinal fluid that had filled the gap where her cerebellum should be. Years later, she was doing much better, but to this day, the occurrence of this rare condition is still not fully understood. Number 2. The boy who couldn't open his mouth. Born in June 2013, Wyatt Scott suffers from an extremely rare condition known as congenital trismus. This disorder makes it impossible for Wyatt to open his mouth. Although the most common cause of congenital trismus is tetanus, which causes lockjaw, Wyatt never had tetanus. In rare cases, fused joints may cause the condition, but neither are Wyatt's joints fused. There is no diagnosis to explain Wyatt, as he is otherwise normal. No one knows what caused this condition. Even as Wyatt has matured and developed the ability to talk, he does so with his mouth closed. He started using sign language instead of trying to speak through his closed mouth. Unfortunately, Wyatt still manages to put things in his mouth, which are then much more difficult to remove since he cannot open it. He's been rushed to the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario more than a dozen times due to vomiting or choking. Wyatt's siblings, who are 3 and 6 years old, by throwing away small things that are around Wyatt. His parents also constantly monitor his drool and his oxygen levels. This means that Wyatt requires care 24/7, so the family can only hope that answers will lead to a cure of his disorder. Number 1. The girl who feels no pain. Since Gabby Zhanga was an infant, it was clear that something was wrong. She chewed so hard on her fingers that she nearly bit through 3 of them. Her parents had her teeth pulled to keep her from chewing through her tongue. She even managed to poke her eyes to the point that her parents were forced to have one of them removed as well. And yet, Gabby didn't feel a thing. Her parents learned that she suffered from an extremely rare condition that prevented her from feeling physical pain. This means she cannot feel cold or hot temperatures, which teach children to bundle up or not touch. This means that when she breaks something, like she did her jaw, months could pass without anyone knowing. This means Gabby needs constant attention just to ensure her day-to-day safety. Gabby's family has been by her side to do just that, and so has her medical team, which includes her primary care doctor, an eye specialist, an orthopedic surgeon, and an endocrinologist. Despite the fact that congenital insensitivity to pain, also known as congenital analgesia, is a rare and difficult condition to deal with, Gabby is heartwarmingly optimistic about her affliction. "I guess I'm more comfortable with my condition than I have been in the past," she said. "It doesn't really affect who I am, but more like what I do." Thank you for watching, and if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and give this video a like. And if you like my voice, you should go ahead and check my channel out, MaddMike. I tell scary stories and strange mysteries. Make sure you stay tuned, and make sure you answer that first question I gave you guys after the 15th countdown.